San Gimignano is a small walled medieval hill town in Tuscany in north-central Italy. Known as the town of fine towers, San Gimignano is famous for its medieval architecture, unique in the preservation of about a dozen of its tower houses. Within the walls, the well-preserved buildings include notable examples of both Romanesque and Gothic architecture. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance era, it was a stopping point for Catholic pilgrims on their way to Rome and the Vatican. The city's development was also improved by the trade of agricultural products from the fertile neighboring hills, in particular Vernaccia wine and saffron used in both cooking and dyeing cloth. In 1199, the city made itself independent of the bishops of Volterra and established a Podesta, and set about enriching the commune with churches and public buildings. However, the peace of the town was disturbed for the next 2 centuries by conflict between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. This resulted in competing families building tower houses of increasingly higher and higher heights. Toward the end of the medieval period, there were 72 tower houses in number, up to 70 meters or 230 feet tall. The rivalry was finally restrained when the local council ordained that no tower was to be taller than that adjacent to the Palazzo Comunale. Today, 13 towers remain of the 72 towers of the 14th century. Despite the bitter political dispute between the Guelphs, who supported the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who sided with the Emperor, the commune developed and prospered in agricultural activities. The city flourished until 1348, when it was struck by the Black Death that affected all of Europe, and about half of the inhabitants died. The town then submitted to the rule of Florence. Initially, some Gothic buildings were constructed in the Florentine style, and many of the towers were reduced to the height of the houses. There was little subsequent development, and San Gimignano remained preserved in its medieval state until the 19th century, when its status as a touristic and artistic town began to be recognized. Piazza Della Cisterna is the main square of the town. It is surrounded by medieval houses of different dates, among them some fine examples of Romanesque and Gothic palazzos. At the center of the piazza stands a well which was the main source of water for the town's residents. The structure dates from 1346. Although much of it has been renovated in the late 20th century, parts of the pavement date from the 13th century. Piazza del Duomo contains some very important buildings, including the Palazzo Comunale, or Municipal Palace, which has been the seat of civic authority since the 13th century, and the Palazzo Vecchio del Podesta, the house of the mayor. The Palazzo Podesta is distinguished by its huge arched loggia. It was rebuilt in the 13th century and enlarged in the 14th century. The present church on this site was consecrated in 1148 and dedicated to St. Gimignanus in the presence of the Pope. During the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, the church was enriched by the addition of frescoes and sculptures. One of the most interesting attractions in San Gimignano is the Torture Museum. There are actually 2 of them, but here are some photos I took in one of the museums. It is a little gruesome, but I didn't have time to visit the museum 20 years ago when I first came here, so I'm glad I got to visit this time around.